Thank you and welcome everybody. It's January 11th, 2022. It's 11:30 and I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement statement. Before we begin, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Semiahmoo people who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. Thank you all for joining us. This is the Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force Legal and Justice Committee. It is 11:32 and this is a call to order. I don't see Caleb. Is Caleb on board with us this morning or not?
He is not. He has, we are just swamped with a number of issues in the jail and doesn't have time to attend today. We could reschedule that later, but I thought the purpose for calling him was to discuss that Middlesex County, Massachusetts medically assisted treatment program where they assigned navigators to the people even when they're released from jail. And then I realized he's already presented that to the full commission. So it would be kind of redundant to have him do it again, unless there's I don't think there's been a substantial change in the makeup of the committee.
No, he was actually, that was one of the things we did talk to him about a little bit, but I actually talked to him after the last meeting and was hoping he could get me some current jail use statistics and restrictions as we go into discussing more information on competency restoration and reentry services. And I knew he said that it was going to be tight and he was really busy. So I was just kind of, if we had it, then we were going to put it up there. And if he's not available, it's something we can discuss later.
Yeah,
So,
I think we're going to have to do that at a later time. He and the whole jail staff are buried dealing with a number of really critical and compelling issues up there that we need to take care of or figure a way to take care of. At least of which is not COVID.
well, I appreciate that. So I'm just going to move right on to number 3, which is competency and restoration. So those of you that were at the joint behavioral health meeting, we kind of kicked that off, starting with talking from some members from DSHS on restoration and the struggles that they have and how it interacts with some of the struggles that we have. It seems like we're kind of on the same page. We want the same things, but are having a hard time getting there. But one of the things that we wanted to work on is how we can separate what we can do as a legal and justice committee versus what the behavioral health committee is doing. And then we're going to have another joint meeting. I think it's March, if I recall correctly. Jill can probably correct me on that, but I think that's the next joint meeting. So I'd like to hear from members of our committee on ideas on competency and restoration, and if there's things that you think as a legal and justice committee that we can do to work on trying to expedite some of the problems that we're having.
So if I understand correctly, the jail is getting the evaluations in a timely manner, competency evaluations, but not the treatment. Is that what everybody else heard? So people are not being sent for competency in a very timely manner. They're spending, sounds like months and months in the jail waiting for that.
I don't know all the mechanics, to be honest with you, but I know there are backlogs and they were not reflective of what the state purported the backlogs to be, and they've acknowledged that there are issues.
So one of the other issues that's coming up is that out of custody defendants that have competency orders, currently we've received a report that it's 6 to 8 months before they can get an evaluation. And so for courts of limited jurisdiction that aren't booking individuals, and then we have these individuals that have competency issues, what seems to be happening is we're waiting for those orders, and then they end up committing more crimes and getting booked, which could be more serious. That could be in the felony world, and then they get their eval, and then they're still sitting there because there's either not beds available or restoration facilities. Some of that's due to COVID. Some of it's due to treatment providers. I'm going to ask Maya if she has an idea of how many of the defendants that she has knowledge of are also have other charges in other courts or other jurisdictions that are pending evaluations or restoration.
I don't know that I could give you a number. I think Wendy recently sent out like a list of individuals that it was like a jail aging report. And I started to go through that to see like who represented the individuals who are there the longest. And many of them are there because of competency concerns. And many of those people have cases in multiple jurisdictions. I couldn't quantify it for you exactly.
Do you or Eric, when you have an individual look and contact defense counsel or prosecution with other jurisdictions, if you see that they have charges pending with other courts?
Yeah, I mean, and every time we have a client who's got an attorney representing them in a municipality, I mean, we are typically in contact with their counsel. I mean, usually we're working towards some kind of global resolution or, having to confer. So I would say it would likely be rare that the attorneys haven't at least reached out by email to one another to say, hey, I have the same client as you.
So something that was brought up by Tom Kinlan was a suggestion, and I don't know how doable it is, but it was to possibly have evals brought up here for those out of custody individuals, that we could designate an area one day a month or one day every 2 weeks.
We've certainly done batches, like they've communicated to us, oh, we're going to come up and do evals, and we tee up, everybody we can gather in to do them in that fashion. Whenever they've asked to do that, we've tried to accommodate it. I mean, it really has to do whether we have good contact with our clients or not, and how immediate of a response. But I mean, as soon as we get any notice that they have an eval, we do everything we can to make that happen, including doing that.
I guess I'm just looking for direction on other items that we could do as a Legal and Justice Committee to try to expedite some of this. I don't know how successful we're going to be, but obviously it does put a strain on the system.
Yeah, I mean, there's a class action lawsuit about it. I mean, that has not changed the fact that our clients remain untreated and incarcerated in the jail while they're not competent. I don't think there is anything that we as a committee can do.
Thank you. Sad to hear, but I'd rather have the honesty right there up front. I would like to see if we could do it for some of the local jurisdictions for defendants that have transportation issues, and reach out to DSHS and say, hey, this individual has court on this date in Blaine. Can you guys come up and do an eval with that attorney? Because at least they might already have a schedule. That's another issue that I think comes up, is some of these people aren't going to show up for court. They might not show up for their competency eval as well. So I think that's also an issue that we have. But I know some of the local attorneys have told me that they don't have a way to get these individuals to the eval because there's nobody that's going to transport them unless they're in custody. A lot of them, the attorneys don't want to take their risk on transporting these people, and some of them, their families have alienated them. So I think that's also maybe an issue that we could look at. I see Stephen's hand and Chief Tanksley's hand, so I'm really happy to hear other people's perspectives.
I have two quick questions, Raylene. I'm a little confused because I understood Jackie's initial contact to say we were able to get the evaluations, we just couldn't get the restoration treatment. And now I'm hearing that there are roadblocks to the evaluations. So I'm not sure what we're saying there. But secondly, this just seems like yet another example of where the adequacy of the behavioral health system is so woeful and just ripples out the effects that harm communities. I know Sheriff Elfo, I know Prosecutor Ritchie, I know the health department all have state associations lobbying the legislature. And there are a lot of things tweaking the package of criminal legislation from last session that we're in conversation with legislative representatives about. Is there any way that we can bump system capacity up on their priority list? It seemed to me that both Representative Rammel and Shoemake were very open to responding to concerns that we had identified, and this would seem to be one of the top ones across the board.
Stephen, briefly on your first question, Jackie is right that the evaluations are being done, but they're being done when they're incarcerated. So the True Blood decision basically said you have to have an evaluation within a week. And that is happening when they're incarcerated. But when they're not incarcerated and they still have competency issues and they've got citations and they have criminal charges pending, that's what's taking 6 to 8 months to get an eval. And you also have to get somebody to that evaluation, or you bring that evaluator somewhere that they can meet. And that's a struggle there. The second part, maybe that's something we want to bring a representative in and also another representative from DSHS to discuss this at the next meeting. So thank you for that. And I hope that gives you a little bit of an idea. And
Yeah.
I'm to Chief.
If I could just follow up, Raylene, thank you. That clarified the evaluation part. It's also possible that the task force as a whole could weigh in with a letter to our delegation. Again, I don't know what the State Sheriff's Association is doing or the Prosecutors Association is doing in terms of legislative agenda for the coming session. I know it's a short session.
That is on the list, which is becoming a longer and longer list in light of some of the other legislation that's pending as well.
Thank you, Chief Sheriff Elfo and Stephen Gockley. Chief Tanksley.
Sure. So with regard to the locations of the evaluations, when we had the guest speaker on a few weeks ago, she listed 4 different locations where some of these evaluations take place. So if I'm hearing you correctly, and I can't remember the exact locations of all the places, but is that the only place the evaluations can happen? And what's the closest location to Whatcom County is one question. And the second question is, with regard to the concerns that we have we started like a bullet list or a short white paper or something to that effect to, I guess, kind of memorialize some of the concerns that we have? The reason why I'm asking is because, like I said yesterday at the other meeting, I am on the State Substance Use Recovery Services Advisory Committee with regard to the Blake decision. And I have to report back to them different gaps of services and of that nature to that committee. So I'm wondering, have we started something in terms of just documenting our concerns?
We've just got summaries from the meetings that we've had in the past, but I think it would be a good thing for us to actually start and begin with. And something that was recently brought up to me by a probation officer was that she's noticing mental health court is almost becoming more of a drug court because of a lot of the individuals that have the mental health issues also have substance issues, and that seems to be feeding off each other, and there's more substance issues with the ones that are being seen in mental health court. Now, I haven't been in mental health court, and I don't know how accurate all of that is, but it might be something worth looking into.
And then, oh, I'm sorry,
wanna-
Maya.
Can I respond to Marilyn? I think that dual diagnosis has always been the most prevalent presentation of clients in mental health court. I do not think that's anything new. And it's something they struggle with about whether they can, whether they will admit individuals who are dual diagnosed. And that's something that we, as advocates for people that want to be in, are constantly striving to get them admitted, because drug court will say, no, the mental health concerns interfere too much. And then drug court will say no, or mental health court will say no, the drug concerns interfere too much. And then we've got these, most of our clients are dual diagnosed. They're not simply one or the other, but neither court thinks they're appropriate. So they both have to grapple with this multitude of issues and sort of balancing, well, what it's like, well, which is more, I mean, it's really tricky. I don't think either of those courts are clearly one or the other.
I mean, it's really essential for all the treaters on both sides of this coin to be cross-trained. I've been advocating for that for quite some time. It's like, it's not sufficient for a psychotherapist to just know their own profession. They've got to understand how addiction plays in and aggravates the two sets of problems back and forth. So the treater has got to have really good command of both issues, and that comes back to training. The thing I'm noticing about this conversation is like it's a hugely depressing conversation, but no one is saying that directly. Stephen, you're getting closer towards it, but the truth is that we're lacking. This is the gap that everyone talks about. These are the gaps. The gaps must be filled in order to have a well-functioning system. That means we have to use whatever powers we have to lean on the sources of funding and training at the highest levels. So those of you who are in other organizations of your own profession, I hope you will speak up for the gaps that you are noticing and seeing, because we have to take care of everything. It's our responsibility. We want to do a good job. We cannot do a good job without the gaps being filled. And so we just have to work harder at making it happen. There is a little bit of progress. I definitely see that, but it means we have to, yank it up a little bit. And just tell the truth, because the truth is that we don't have the services that we need in order to get people through our system in what we consider to be a just way. This is not justice to have people lingering and getting more traumatized in our own system that we're trying to work on. So, yeah.
Thank you, Arlene. Well said. Deborah, Holly?
Yeah, I just want to add some things here on one personal experience with my son, what the topic of discussion is, and just first of all, add to what Arlene said. This is just so sad because such a large percentage of the incarcerated population has mental health and substance use disorder problems. And from personal experience, my son is almost a year now in Pierce County Jail with a charge down there as well as pending charges in Whatcom County. And there is a global resolution as a ultimate goal for settling this. And in response to what I'm sorry, I'm escaping her name, the head of the Whatcom County Public Defenders, Maya, excuse me, said usually, and in my son's case, the two public defenders work together on resolving the case. But getting back to the subject at hand, my son in Pierce County had his public defender down there suggest that he go to Western State Hospital for a competency evaluation. And if I remember right, it was only in a span of 8 weeks that he was lucky enough to get admitted into Western State Hospital, and he received or excuse me, he was restored to competency within 90 days and then returned to the Pierce County Jail. You know, the thing for me, it was so sad. I mean, it was good and bad. It was good that he got a diagnosis, but what was so sad is after decades of off and on incarceration and 3 prison sentences, it took this for him to be able to find out what really was wrong with him. And, you know, now he's been taking medication and he's really different in a really good way. And yeah, there's so many problems with this whole thing and in getting to everybody. And I agree with the former comment of, you know, if you've got people out there that have pending charges, but they're not in custody and they need a competency evaluation, I would say in my best guess, it's a very slim chance that those people are going to show up for any kind of competency evaluation. And yes, they do mostly happen in during incarceration. And I'm thinking that maybe it might differ from county to county as far as how fast these competency evaluations can be done. But I guess I'm saying competency evaluation after the initial evaluation to be even fitting the criteria to get into Western State Hospital. So maybe my son got lucky. I don't know. From this conversation, it sounds like he did. So I just wanted to interject that.
Thank you, Deborah, for sharing your personal experience. It's enlightening and helpful. Jackie Mitchell.
Thanks, Deborah. I'm glad your son got some help this time around.
Thank you.
There's a little known tool called assisted outpatient treatment that was designed, I think, for people who needed to go to Western State, or so they were found incompetent, I believe, and we're supposed to go to Western State, but it was felt they could be managed in a lesser restrictive kind of situation, an outpatient treatment mode, which I generally often don't think that can happen, but for those people that could, maybe this is an option that we could explore a little bit further as to whether or not we could use it for that interim situation. Although the thing is, they have to have a court order they have to be court ordered to, or mandated to go, because again, as Deborah mentioned, a lot of people won't go to appointments, they won't take their medication, and then they get off track, they slide off the track. And so I guess I guess I'm kind of thinking out loud more than anything, trying to think. I was going to talk to John Dukes before I brought it up and just see why it isn't very well used, other than what I've said. It used to be a resource issue as well. They didn't resource it very well. There were no staff put towards it. There was no money put towards it, that kind of thing. So I'll try to get more information and come back if I have anything salient to say about it. They keep redrafting the legislation, so it makes me think that there's something about it that's useful, so that somebody's using it somewhere, and maybe Maya has some experience with that. Anyway.
Thank you, Jackie. Maya? You're muted, Maya.
Thanks. Sorry, I can't address that program, Jackie. Sorry. And I don't want to leave the impression that our clients who are given personal recognizance or who post bail and are incompetent in the community don't show up for their evals, because we do set them up at our office all the time with Western State Hospital. There are, of course, some competent and incompetent individuals who we lose track of due to life circumstances, but we do get many of them in to be evaluated. But I wanted to return, Chief Tinksley had two questions that I think we strayed from and never really answered. And I think one of them was asking about locations. And I didn't understand the question entirely. Like, are you asking where can they be evaluated or where can they get treatment? And I don't know if he's listening or tuned in right now. Oh, hi.
Yeah. So I'm always listening. That might not be on camera. So I think the question is twofold. So it's the treatment and the evaluation, or I should say the evaluation and the treatment.
So evaluations for in custody folks can happen in our jail, or sometimes the individual, if need be, is transported to Western State Hospital for observation for a period of time if an evaluation in the jail isn't adequate. So there's sort of two different ways in custody evaluations can occur. And then if they're out of custody, the evaluation can happen wherever the evaluator is willing to meet the client. You know, sometimes that's at our office. Often it's at our office if they're our client. But treatment at this point can only occur at Western State Hospital or Eastern State Hospital in some occurrences. If Eastern has openings, sometimes they'll ask if we would allow our client to be transported there. Of course, it makes it very difficult for attorney-client communication when that happens. But there is legislation that will allow for outpatient restoration services, but we are like the last county that will be phased into that program. It is started in different regions in the state, but it hasn't reached the northwest corner yet. And we're the last, and maybe they'll have it really tuned and it'll be great by the time it gets here. But we don't have that option. So it's only inpatient restoration that's permitted.
Yeah, and the reason why I asked the question, because earlier Raylene talked about the transportation issues with out of custody folks.
Yeah, I mean, my experience is the evaluators will come to Whatcom County, and there's certainly plenty of like conference rooms in the courthouse, or that could be found if other if municipalities, or I don't know, whoever, somebody needed a place to meet, they could find a place to meet. I think we do them by video sometimes too. Like we set up we have an out of custody client come in and we set it up on video for them to meet with the evaluator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. I didn't realize that they were sometimes done via video, and that would be beneficial. And I'll pass that on to some of our defense counsels in the small cities and see if that's something they're able to do. It just, like I said, I got an email from one of the attorneys with North County that said, yeah, I think we've got 3 competency orders right now pending. And the evaluator said it was going to be 6 to 8 months before we could get evaluations on these individuals. And that's depressing, because we want them to have help sooner. And if they can't get the evaluation, we can't get them the help. The other gap that has came up is restoration. And that kind of goes into navigation and reentry, because a lot of these times these people get restored, they get returned to jail, and then they're sitting there waiting, and they may have already served what their sentence would have been if there was a plea. So that's an issue. And then we also see people that get restored, and then after that restoration is done, if they're out of custody, they don't continue to take their meds. They kind of fall off the wagon. And I think that's where we kind of need to look at reentry and a navigation for that, as well as people that are being released from prison and jail. Dave, I see you popped in. Do you have any input in this?
Sorry, I was in a bench trial, so we just got out, and I actually just got onto the conversation, so probably don't have a whole lot of context to contribute right now.
Quite all right. I'm glad to hear that you actually had a trial. A trial right now is a positive thing. So if I go back to Chief Tanksley, I think we can look at where the evaluations are being done. We know that they're being done at the County Defense Office, so that's positive. And look at other options to get evaluations. Restoration is definitely a gap in getting people restored, and navigation is where we're going on to our next topic, unless there are any more questions or thoughts for bringing this back maybe next month with legislations options, and maybe hearing again from one of the individuals from Department of Social and Health Services for reentry and evaluation, or sorry, restoration and competency evaluations. Stephen?
I don't want to lose the thread that this is the second day in a row Chief Tanksley has informed us, reminded us that he is on this statewide task force for lake implementation. And I think either in the committee or in the task force as a whole, his idea of creating a working list of issues that he might advocate for in that setting is a really valuable one. So I'd leave it to you, Raylene, and you, Arlene, first off, to think about putting together something either out of the joint meetings or out of our meetings that might be a useful guide for Chief Tank to present in that statewide body.
Stephen, thanks for that. But I do want to make it clear that I don't know why, but when you look at the list, and if anyone's interested in to know who's on that committee, I could certainly send that to Raylene or Arlene, and then you could send that out. But I am the only person on that committee from Whatcom County, but I'm there representing the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs. So I'm their representative, not a representative from Whatcom County. But I did note that there aren't any other folks from Whatcom County, or in fact, Skagit County for that matter.
Thank you, Chief Tanksley. And if you could actually send that list to Jill Nixon, she's better at distribution than I am. She's got all the contacts and information. And I think that would be a better option. And then Arlene and I can work on a list, but I think coming from the joint meetings would be better because you'd have more of a well-rounded list than just from legal and justice. And I think it impacts all of us in different ways. So those are my thoughts on that. Any other comments on this topic? All right, I have to flip over my cheat sheet here, and we're going back to reentry services. And the 3 bullet points are the reentry work plan for Legal and Justice Committee with Behavioral Health Committee, inventory of services, so what we have currently and what we're lacking, and then best practices. So I don't know if any of you had a chance to look at the I can't remember the first page, but it was best practices from Harvard. I believe it was 2019 on reentry. It gave us some guidance on making sure we're doing things right, or that things that we can do better. And then looking at what we can do just with our committee versus the joint, our behavioral health, and then bringing it back together with the joint committees, because I think all of this stuff is intertwined. So I'm just going to open up the floor and see if anybody has comments on reentry. And Jackie, if you do you have any more information on the navigator or the person that was hopefully going to be hired from the jail, maybe?
Oh, I see. Yeah, you're talking about the reentry staff for the jail behavioral health team. Yeah, it's a little bit delayed because the manager came down sick. She and her entire family came down sick, so she was out for a couple weeks. But she is currently going into the jail and doing some of the providing some help to the existing staff on the crisis services. And then her next step is to turn around and learn about the reentry process and what she needs to do. And she thinks she has somebody who could fill the position. But she wanted them to shadow and make sure that they understood the job and that it would be a good fit. So it's rolling, but more slowly than we had hoped.
Thank you for that, Jackie. Arlene?
Would you like me to go over the main issues listed in the reentry studies? Just in case somebody didn't read that really long article about it, I did. And you did too, Stephen. I mean, it's not that the information was particularly new, but it does really help a lot to have, what do people call it when something's been proven? I forgot the term for it, but the most important, shall I go ahead? Yeah, okay. The most important issues I thought from reading were education and job training, most especially. We have had some educational help in our jail in the past, and I believe when he reported to us, he talked about the waiting list of people. So we really, it was a good program, but it needed more staff, I would say, from that report that we received. So education is a key factor in recidivism. Additionally, it's not just jobs, but long-term jobs, so that the stability is created that is needed for someone to feel confident, support their family, support themselves, and get housing. I thought that distinction was really important. It's not sufficient just to get any old job that you might have for 6 months and then go back possibly to doing criminal things. So education and jobs provide pride and self-confidence for people. The next, I think, most important thing probably was housing, because without the stability of housing, actually no treatment is effective. That's what I've been seeing in the research that we've been doing here. Another issue was quality health care. So it wasn't just mental health and substance abuse care, it was also physical care. And a point was made about, especially women have a lot more long-term health problems that need to be addressed. And they're actually, many of the people in jail don't have any kind of insurance at all, so they don't get treatment. So this is a piece that I think is a little harder to fill, because you have to figure out a way for that to happen. Mentoring was discussed, which is, I think it's quite similar to the idea of navigation, in the sense that a person commits themselves to supporting and encouraging and being interested in what the person is doing or about to do or might do. So having that personal interest seems really important. The volunteers for that were typically from religious organizations and other social organizations. They often had programs of volunteers. This was effective. There are programs also called healing communities, and they're particularly focused on trauma and the difficulty of the early lives of people and trying to heal. There was a particularly important attention to the healing of families and making sure that family ties were established in some way. It sort of suggests an availability of perhaps of family counseling it seems to me that a lot of problems when people come back into their families could be addressed in some family sessions, and just sometimes just a few, to start to talk about the difficulties. Some part of the job training process a lot of times was social behavior, how to act on the job, how to deal with a boss, how to get along with other people. Even there were even classes about money management, which is a part of life that's different when you're in a criminal life and an ordinary life. Did I leave anything out, Stephen? Oh, yeah. They talked about tailored interventions. So particular groups sometimes need a specialized intervention, such as the indigenous population, which actually I think we have through the programs that we have. Typical recidivism is around 35%, which seems to me high. When these programs are working well, it goes down to something like 10%, 9 or 10%. People are trained with interview skills, with coping strategies. And also, it was very important, he talked about that rehab begins in jail, not just when they're getting out of jail, but from the very beginning of the process. I don't know if we've had any of that. I'd be curious to know.
Thank you for the report on that, Arlene. I appreciate you actually reading through all of it. It was a pretty lengthy article. Deborah? I see Deborah Hawley, Jackie Mitchell, Stephen Gockley, and Moonwater with their hands up. And
Okay, can you hear me okay? Okay, I'm on speaker and I'm driving, so I'm just talking here. Okay, so I just wanted to mention the part that Arlene brought up about inmates not having insurance. So when an inmate is incarcerated, if they have Apple insurance, which they are entitled to, that insurance is null and void while they're incarcerated, but within 24 hours of their release, that insurance kicks back in again. My son applied for it years ago, and being in and out of jail all the time, it would, you know, it was like a rubber band. It would go out of effect, and then as soon as he came out, it would go in effect. And from what I saw, there was some kind of connection between a community health, which was the plan he had through Apple, and DOC, or they had some way of knowing. It would just like go into effect within 24 hours. We never had to make a phone call. So I just wanted to mention that there might possibly be a lot of folks that are incarcerated off and on, and when they're not, perhaps they're not aware that they can apply for Apple insurance, state insurance. It started applying to people like this when my son got out of his last prison sentence 4 years ago. He basically had that card in hand practically when he came out. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there.
Jackie?
Yeah, I think, Deborah, I think that's not as big of an issue right now. I think that people are, certainly when we have a reentry staff, they're often getting signed up for Apple Health. And I think, as I recall, Wendy saying that the jail actually has somebody kind of helping with that at this point. I could be wrong, and we probably should circle back with jail staff. But I wanted to say that a little bit about my impression of the article, since I also read it, which was that it seemed definitely more geared towards reentry from prison, which is different from reentry from the jail. And what I've noticed, and this is my experience watching people and listening to the jail behavioral health staff, is that there's quite, the needs of the people coming out of the jail are, they're often in more chaos and crisis, and they have more needs for stability. And I don't think many of them, and especially I can speak to the behavioral health population, that very many of them are ready for vocational educational kinds of activities. I mean, what they need is behavioral health supports and housing. And I remember way back when the task force first began, we had our reentry person at that time, Allison Batchelder-Besley, who spoke to this and said that housing was definitely the highest need of the people that she was seeing. So I just would hate to create a system that is more conducive to prison reentry than to jail reentry. I also want to say that there's and this would be my belief based on research that I've read, that there may be a higher incidence of acquired brain injury in the jail as opposed to in prison, where the balance is more towards people with antisocial personality disorders. Not that there isn't acquired brain injuries in prison, and not that there isn't antisocial personality disorder in the jail, but just the balance is a little bit different. We know from looking at past research that 65% at least of people have an acquired brain injury, and that includes things like fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, all the way to alcohol-related dementia, brain injuries from fights, etc., that kind of thing. So we're looking at, I think, at a higher crisis needs population who probably needs more structured support when they get out of jail, just a higher volume of that kind of person versus prison, where, you know, it's a fairly, I mean, obviously there's that whole counter social thing that goes on, but that happens less in a jail. That's another major difference. There's not that opportunity because people aren't there that long. With an average length of stay of about 10 days, people aren't there long enough to really develop a whole entire network of social system that's below the surface, or that isn't part of the official way a jail or a prison is run. So that doesn't happen so much in a jail. A little bit of it, but just not nearly to that extent. So just, I think understanding some of those differences is kind of important to determining sort of what the next steps are and what reentry programs should be there. And it's not that all of those things shouldn't be included, but they're just maybe a little bit differently ordered. And of course, it has to be individualized and tailored to each person's needs as they come out of the jail.
Thank you, Jackie, and I appreciate that. I think you're spot on, with an exception of our current jail population, which is why I was really hoping Caleb would be able to pull some of that data. Just because I think a lot of our people that are incarcerated right now are felonies, violent offenders, and mentally ill due to our COVID population. I could be completely wrong on that, but I think there's a lot of people waiting for trials that have been there longer than normal. If it was the misdemeanor population, I would agree on, like, our DUIs. It's usually a day or when they sober up and then they're released. I don't see them in there very long. I don't see a lot of our DVs that are at the misdemeanor levels in there very long. But the felonies and the people that are waiting for competency and restoration are there longer. So I think there's a different population right now than there normally is. But I do agree with your summation of this on a normal scale. Stephen?
So could I just tag on to what you're saying, Raylene? Because
Yes.
I think you're right. I think there are some more serious criminogenic folks with criminogenic attitudes, but I don't think it's that so different that we'd be looking at employment first, for example, as a broad scale program. But I also want to say that I have the data here. The average length of stay in 2020 was still 10 days. I don't know what it is for 2021, but it was still just 10 days. in 2020. So that could have changed, and that might change some of my perspective as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Jackie. Steve?
Thanks, Raylene. I noticed that Moonwater had her hand up before mine, and even though she's lowered it now, I want to offer the chance to her to make her comment before I take the floor.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm hoping my computer doesn't fritz out here, but so I'm still actually gathering a couple thoughts. I think the main things that I wanted to download was just, so they're a little bit disparate. Just reminding the committee to continue to integrate available information from the statewide reentry council, which probably some of you are more attuned to than others. I think there was a report issued in 2020, which I believe was after I've lost track of when Chris Polos came to speak to the whole task force. But just a reminder about that thread as an available resource and body within Washington State, but also might have more of a prison focus, as you were saying, Jackie, but just there's a report that there might be some nuggets to glean from that is a little bit more recent. And then I realize as I'm stepping off of the council, just please know that the DRC will continue to be an available resource. We haven't yet formed, together how we can best support reentry efforts, but it's an interest area of the center through a restorative justice trauma-informed lens, whether it's through some education efforts in conflict management and interpersonal skills, to the possibility of helping to hold space for family members, folks who are re-entering, and do they have the necessary resources. I don't know what that would look like, but it's an interest area. I'm open to continued conversation. I'll try to follow your progress, in the coming months and years ahead as we figure out how we can best be of support. And so what's coming to mind for me is, Jackie, as I was hearing you speak to what some of those primary needs are that you're seeing folks coming out at the jail level. I'm just thinking about all of the local nonprofits that are providing such helpful resources to community members. And I don't know I don't think there's yet been a coordinated sort of re-entry conversation with multiple nonprofit stakeholders at the table to do some brainstorming about how to come together to support this. Perhaps there has been, and I'm not privy to that, but that's just thinking about Opportunity Council with all of the housing related resources. I don't know what the status is in the moment of the Restorative Community Coalition. I know reentry is a huge interest of theirs. I don't know what their staffing or sort of structure is like in the moment, but I know there's a handful of community-based nonprofits, stakeholders that have value to add to this conversation. So as the council moves forward, as the task force moves forward, and as we're moving forward in our individual relationship building, I think there's more to kind of glean and pull together from folks who are doing some good work that could offer some additional support. And I'll share other ideas or specifics as they come to me, if they come to me. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Moonwater. Steve?
Thank you. That was what I was hoping Moonwater was going to say and wanted her to say first. Full disclosure, I've been on Moonwater's board for a few years. I'm going off, but I'm still very supportive of dispute resolution centered programs. I want to note that the task force steering committee, and maybe even a couple of other members not in the steering committee, are part of the county council stakeholder advisory group to develop an initiative for a new jail, yes, but a continuum of services like we've been talking about for years. So maybe a downtown facility, but maybe also what I've heard Councilmember Buchanan call a justice campus that would have facility-based, but not incarceral kinds of services. And so that's a context where a lot of the needs, including reentry services, should be part of the conversation. We should be planning to be able to provide those services spatially as well as programmatically. And so I just encourage any of us who are on that needs assessment group, the stakeholder advisory group, to bring this up in those conversations, because there are a lot of people who don't have any background in what the task force work has been, who could benefit for some education. And my last comment is, in my years on the task force, I have no professional expertise at all in this, but it's becoming more and more clear to me the issues that our jail population deals with leave them very alone and isolated. Their social networks are broken by behavioral health and substance use disorder issues. And so I think what Jackie was saying about the beginning of reconnecting could be a really important thing, that however short their stay in the jail could be begun there and could continue outside, where I think most of reentry work ought to focus. So in terms of jail planning, we should have more room, more privacy, more technology to allow Zoom reconnections. Moonwater's supervised visitation program via Zoom in the pandemic has been able to reconnect very high intensity visitation disputes across state lines even. So even someone really geographically disconnected from family and network could, if we did it right, programmatically and spatially, start to reconnect and rebuild a network. And I think that would be a really important base to start with for a lot of reentry success.
Thank you, Stephen. Maya, and then Jackie.
Hi, this is sort of an aside, but Stephen, I don't think there's a public defender participant in the stakeholder advisory group on the Justice campus. And I don't know why that wouldn't be. I think I know I've expressed interest in participating in the past. Who do I petition to have some voice on that?
I will put in some word for you myself, Maya, but
Okay,
I would say if you would email Councilmember Buchanan and CC me and Jack Hovenier, I think you'd have some support for that.
okay, I'll do that. Thanks so much. Sorry to digress a bit.
So just following up on what Stephen said, yeah, Stephen, you said that so eloquently that I think good reentry begins on the inside with good treatment space. Sorry, it's my boss calling, so I'll call him back in just a minute. But good reentry begins with good services on the inside, and what we don't have is adequate treatment space of any kind. The new jail, once proposed, would have had just something that any clinician would have died for in terms of technology and the space to be able to provide confidential services to people that need them. And that's what we need. And we needed group space to be able to do some skills training. I don't think anybody's going to be able to hold a job if they don't have good social skills. So social skills training also in there. And while they're in jail, they're not actually doing a whole lot. So it's a great time to be able to interface with folks and try to begin the process of really stabilizing and building those skills that they need on the outside when they get back into the community. So thank you for bringing that up, Stephen. That was a message I definitely wanted to deliver today.
Thank you, everybody, for the robust conversation. I'm going to wrap this topic up because we're coming to an end of the meeting, but I briefly touch on some of the other items that we haven't got to. One would be regular meeting length. So some of the things that I took back from this, and I agree with everybody here, but when I went back to the Harvard study, one of the things that was brought up is housing, and affordable housing in Whatcom County is definitely something I've heard from people that are convicted felons to individuals released from custody that they can't find affordable housing in areas where they can get the most treatment and services, or transportation is an issue. If they do get a affordable housing. It's in rural areas where there's not transportation for employment. And then race and gender, because we're dealing with GARE, and it's definitely something that impacts reentry. I look at just the misdemeanors, and I know this is more because that's what I focus on, but I looked at the caseloads from last year for DUIs in Whatcom County, and I looked at Blaine, and then I looked at Everson. And for 2021, there were 5 DUIs out of Blaine, which is very low. And I know COVID has had somewhat of an impact on that. But Everson had 45 DUIs in a year, which is huge considering their population is lower than our population. And I was hoping that I could pull up the stats with gender and race before the meeting, but I was having computer issues, so I wasn't able to do that. But just given from what I've heard from Judge Bobbink is that a lot of the individuals that are being seen in the jail and in Everson are of the Hispanic culture, and that there's always a interpreter there. And so that would be something else that I think we want to look at for reentry is there a language barrier? Is there a way we can assist people in education with getting English language and as a second language, or is there a way we can help with that? There's a lot of other things that we're going to need to be talking about on reentry, what we can do, what we can't do, where the gaps are and what we have. So would encourage you to look at different programs that are in place and programs that we need more assistance on. And then we'll revisit this again at our next February meeting and bring that to attention for our joint meeting on what we can do as a group. I see Chief Tanksley's hand up. You're muted.
I guess I just want to put some feelers out there. When I was at St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department, we did a program with the Missouri Department of Probation and Parole, different social service entities, job placement entities. It was just a lot of people involved. And what we did was we had sort of a fair in one location where we invited folks that were integrating back into society from being incarcerated. And we provided sort of like a one-stop shop for people to know what's available to them and their families out there. So I don't know if we've ever had anything like that in Whatcom County. It was a one-day event. It's a big endeavor. You have to have a fairly large space. So, due to COVID, that might not be the best thing right now, but just something to think about in the future.
We have done a program like that for homeless services once a year, which I know is very effective and very helpful to people. But yeah, like you're saying, with this pandemic going on, all the group activities are so limited.
I like the idea, and I think we want to look at that, and hopefully maybe soon things will change and we'll be able to do something exterior. And maybe it's something that with technology and virtual options, maybe we can look at different methods of doing things. I mean, we're obviously doing that in the courts and other areas, and here we're doing a Zoom meeting, so something to look at. So thank you, Chief Tanksley. Regular meeting length, I'm going to bring that back at the next meeting because we seem to run out of time a lot lately. So put your thinking caps on and let me know if you guys want to add an extra 30 minutes to our next Legal and Justice meeting. We'll discuss it at the next Legal and Justice meeting. Let me clarify that and see if that's something that's of interest. I know everybody's busy and it's hard to get to some of these meetings, so there's a challenge there as well. Other business, is there any other business that I'm missing at this point? Okay, Jill, do we have anybody for public comment?
We have one attendee at the meeting today. If you'd like to speak to the committee, please virtually raise your hand now. No hand is raised. And if I could get Raylene and Arlene to stay after for a few minutes, that would be great. Thank you.
Will do, thank you. With that in mind, I think we can adjourn our meeting, and I'd like to thank everybody for their participation today. I appreciate it. Have a great day.